In June 2026, one of Europe's most important future fighter partnerships hit a breaking point. France and Germany agreed to halt the FCAS New Generation Fighter effort that had been built around cooperation between Dassault and Airbus. For France, that immediately raised a difficult question. What happens when the aircraft meant to shape your future no longer has a clear multinational path forward? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Keep upgrading the Rafale. But that is only half the story, because Rafale F5 was not invented after the FCAS crisis. France was already moving toward F5 before that partnership broke apart. And that changes the way this entire program should be understood. F5 is not a completely new fighter hiding inside an old name. It is the next major stage in an aircraft France has been evolving for decades. Dassault has long described Rafale as an omni-role platform. The idea was never to build one aircraft for one narrow job. France wanted a common platform that could serve from land bases and from an aircraft carrier while supporting a broad range of national requirements. That philosophy also made continuous upgrades unusually important. Instead of replacing the aircraft every time technology moved forward, France kept changing the standard. F3 evolved into F3R. F4 pushed digital integration and connectivity further. And F5 is intended to carry that evolution into the 2030s. But F5 matters for a reason that has very little to do with the shape of the Rafale itself. The biggest change may be the aircraft designed to operate beside it. In October 2024, France formally launched development of an uncrewed aircraft intended to complement Rafale F5. Dassault says that aircraft will build on technology and experience from the nEUROn demonstrator. And nEUROn gives this story a much longer history than the headlines suggest. Its flight test story reaches back to 2012. So France did not suddenly discover uncrewed aviation after the FCAS crisis. It had already spent more than a decade experimenting with the technologies behind it. That leads to one of the most important ideas in the F5 program. France is not trying to make the Rafale become a completely different airplane. It is trying to change what the Rafale can work with. That means new sensors, new software, new forms of connectivity, and eventually, an uncrewed partner designed for collaborative operations. The aircraft beside F5 may be new. The experimentation behind it is not. Then, in July 2026, the concept moved another step closer to real flight experimentation. Dassault and Harmattan AI announced a collaborative flight involving a Rafale F4 and an unmanned aerial system carrying the Nambold payload. That aircraft was not the future F5 uncrewed aircraft, and that distinction matters. But it did show that crewed-uncrewed collaboration was moving beyond presentation slides and into real flight experimentation. That may be one of the most revealing developments in this entire story. Because the future of Rafale may depend less on one dramatic upgrade and more on how well multiple systems work together. France is also building the software side of that idea. In January 2026, Dassault Aviation announced a strategic partnership with Harmattan AI. The partnership includes embedded artificial intelligence and controlled autonomy for future aerospace systems. Dassault specifically connects that work to Rafale F5 and its future uncrewed system. France is also working with other domestic technology partners on sovereign AI. The pattern is hard to miss. France does not only want control over the airplane, it wants a high degree of control over the software, autonomy, sensors, and industrial ecosystem around it. That is the strategic logic behind much of the Rafale story. But sovereignty comes with a price. If France wants to control more of the system itself, France also has to develop, fund, integrate, and sustain more of that system. And F5 is becoming a major integration project. Thales has been developing the future RBE-2XG radar for the F5 standard. Other parts of the Rafale sensor and electronic architecture are evolving as well. Safran, meanwhile, unveiled the M88 T-Rex in 2025 as an engine evolution intended for future Rafale standards. None of those developments turns Rafale into a clean sheet aircraft, and they do not erase the basic design choices made when the Rafale airframe was created. Rafale was not designed as a clean-sheet, low-observable aircraft. F5 does not magically change that fact. And France does not need to pretend otherwise. The French approach is to keep improving the aircraft while building a broader system around it. That makes simple fighter versus fighter arguments much less useful than they appear. The more interesting question is whether France can keep Rafale relevant long enough for its next combat aircraft to arrive. And this is where the FCAS breakdown becomes important again. Dassault's own 2026 planning did not stop with F5. Before the FCAS New Generation Fighter effort was halted, Dassault was already publicly talking about 3 separate tracks: Rafale F5, a combat drone, and a future fighter. Then FCAS and NGF were halted, but France did not simply close the book on a future aircraft. Dassault said discussions were underway with the French government about an alternative demonstrator for a future combat aircraft. That alternative could be pursued on a French basis or through another form of cooperation. So F5 is not evidence that France has abandoned the next generation. It may be evidence that France does not want to wait for the next generation to solve every problem. That is a much more interesting bet. Keep the current aircraft evolving while building technologies that may eventually outgrow it. There is another reason France can make that bet. Rafale is not sitting on a dying production line. As of June 30th, 2026, Dassault still had 208 Rafales in its backlog. The company says 533 Rafales had been ordered since the beginning of the program, including 323 for export. That gives France something many aging aircraft programs do not have: a large active customer base and a production system still working through years of demand. But success creates its own pressure. Dassault has to deliver aircraft for existing customers while preparing F5 and contributing to the technologies that come after it. Suppliers have to grow with that demand. Engineers have to integrate new systems without disrupting current production. Software has to mature. The uncrewed aircraft has to move from development into a dependable operational system. And France still has to decide exactly what its post-Rafale fighter path will look like. Those are not small problems. They are the real risk behind the F5 strategy. The challenge is much bigger than simply upgrading an airframe. France is trying to evolve Rafale, build an uncrewed partner, expand sovereign AI, sustain a huge export backlog, and shape a future fighter at the same time. That is an enormous amount of industrial work to synchronize, and every part of it has its own schedule. If those pieces mature together, F5 could remain a highly relevant part of French air power deep into the next decade. If they do not, the bridge could become longer and more expensive than France expects. And that brings us back to the question at the beginning. What does France do when its multinational future fighter path breaks apart? The answer, at least for now, is not to choose between the Rafale and the future. It is to work on both. Keep Rafale evolving. Build the uncrewed aircraft beside it. Develop the software and industrial base around them. And keep a future combat aircraft on the table. That is why Rafale F5 is more interesting than the phrase Super Rafale makes it sound. This is not simply a story about making an old fighter more powerful. It is a story about buying time, preserving industrial independence, learning how crewed and uncrewed aircraft can work together, and preparing for an aircraft that France has not built yet. So what do you think? Is France making the right bet by pushing the Rafale into the next era with new sensors, software, and an uncrewed partner? Or should it move faster toward a completely new fighter? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more fact-based aerospace and defense technology documentaries, hit the like button and subscribe to Defense TV. Because Rafale F5 may not be France's fighter of the future. It may be the aircraft that gets France to it.